Hi, my name is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. We like to go into topics more deeply. Today, I have a very special guest with me. Her name is Desiree Hurtak, and I have had her husband as a guest on my show many times. He's a double PhD in the hard and social sciences. Desiree has come from the very feminine role of supporting her husband in his vast social contribution as a spiritual leader and the founder of the Academy for Future Sciences. He's also, I guess, is he the writer or the facilitator of the Keys of Enoch?
He's the writer. We prefer writer, yes.
You say writer,
yeah.
Okay. And now she is getting involved in ecology and in the environment. She's getting her own PhD, so welcome, Desiree.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah. How did you come to this decision to become a doctor of
Well, we
ecology?
were both founders of the Academy for Future Science some time ago, and when we started working, we realized that there's so much going on out there in terms of what we call future science, and there's so much that's available to people that technology is there, we just need to implement it. And so I've seen the changes going on the planet. I wanted to be able to do something more. We also work a little bit with the United Nations because we're an ECOSOC organization, and so we were at the World Summit for Sustainable Development. And it wasn't just all intellectual. As you know, Uncle, he joined us with, and we were all together at something called the Ubuntu Village, and we had people from Africa and from Asia and from South America all just sharing together and talking about the environment, but also talking about how we have to raise consciousness. I think that's the most important thing. Just the technologies being available are not going to do it. We all have to push and do more to change the planet.
Now, I didn't know that you started the Academy for Future Sciences. You met your husband?
Prior to, yeah.
And what inspired you to work together? Had he already been working in these teaching fields, or did you come when he was sort of a straight
Well, that's a longer story,
scientist?
and I don't know if it's appropriate for this environmental consciousness-raising talk, but we had a lot of similarities. We had a lot of understandings of what each one of us was doing. So.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what
Okay.
my where I'm coming from is my study of the Divine Mother, the 5 elements, is to understand more the power that we need to have change. That's how I understand the feminine metaphorically, that consciousness is the masculine, the Shiva, and the feminine is the active and the Shakti. And that today, people can sort of deny this feminine aspect, this feminine reality in terms of movement. But we're all in an environment. We can say, oh, we're pure consciousness and it's all an illusion and there's no such thing as relationship. And yet the human beings have a relationship to the environment. Permaculture is all about companion planting, how they're related to each other. So I was just wanting to learn more about, because you do come from a spiritual background, that did make a huge dent in the world, just from the spiritual point of view.
Well, I think
now you're going to be a PhD in ecology.
Right. So it's almost gone the other way.
Well, but not the other way from the Divine Mother.
PhD, permanent head damage. But if you come from a very spiritual way, and yeah, the Divine Mother, the Divine Earth, everything is about creation, growth, evolution, change, new life, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And so we need, as the mothering elements of the planet, to keep it that way, to maintain the garden of life. And I think that's really important, whether it's through having children or whether it's through maybe more intellectual things, such as making a difference in public policy, which is something we've tried to move into a little bit more, to try to speak to people and make them aware of where they are. You know, we've gone to like the Amazon, and some people blame the rubber companies, but in actuality, a lot of the problem going on in the Amazon, and believe me, it's a severe problem, is the people who are just unaware. They live there, they think that if they just cut down a tree here or make a ditch here and grow some plants, that, you know, no one's harming them, they're not harming anything else. But that's not true. You multiply that by the 50,000 people who want to do that, and there's a real problem. So education, you know, coming from a greater love perspective is so important for the people of the planet. And I think that's the biggest thing. People are being bombarded by these changes and they don't know why. They don't have a clue on what's going on with Mother Earth. So education, which is something that's fundamental for all of life, is critical.
Well, education can be two things. One where you are learning more about what's going on, but the other is people can become involved in a process that trains them actually not to see what's going on.
Yeah, that's true.
And then when you don't have an atmosphere of intellectual freedom, like it's something I will explore in the future. It just came to my attention that the CO2 studies and the boar samples that would be taken into the ice may not be as accurate as we think, and there's a lot of vested interest behind a certain style of thinking. For example, Al Gore was, if you were an environmentalist not going along with the global warming policy, you risked not having a job. Now, to me, studying the Divine Mother, the five elements, the cycles of nature, just how Alan was talking before about the whole global warming thing, there may be other explanations and a deeper understanding of applied spirituality. That's what I like to call the Divine Mother. Applied spirituality, how you create new realities, becomes more important. So if you're going down to South America, you have a two-pronged approach. One, the Academy for Future Sciences, the Keys of Enoch, the Pista Sophia, all of the huge esoteric studies that you and your husband have gathered together. And then the next, what is the empirical evidence?
Well, I think really, because part of the keys, part of all of our research is raising consciousness. And if we're to understand why we're here, what's going on, we can talk about other realms, and certainly we do, because that's part of our inner nature, to understand our many aspects of ourselves, our higher nature, but we also have to understand this nature as well. So if we really are to raise consciousness, it has to be on all these levels. I think that's the most important thing, because otherwise people are ungrounded, or in some cases people are too grounded and don't understand that there's so much of a higher nature that they're also a part of. So we try to bring the balance together.
Or the too grounded could be too easily misled, not by education, but some kind of training or control to go into a certain direction.
Right, and that's
then the higher perspective would help you to be not so susceptible to being crunched into a.
And that's the one good thing about the internet, because you can, no matter where you live, what you're doing, you can tap into a flow of information, scientific information, people's ideas, and you can start making your own decisions. That's the most important thing, of course, that you come to your own conclusion. You don't just copy somebody else's. And that coming into awareness is understanding Mother Earth, understanding also a higher Divine Mother, we might say, of how our creation ever got here in the first place. And in a certain sense, we don't always think that we evolved from the plants and the trees, that there's a higher consciousness that we are also a part of, and that we're all part of this collective wholeness. And we are the caretakers of this planet. I think that's the most important message that I have to say, that even in the book of Genesis, we were told that, you know, we were given the animals to name, we were given the plants and the trees to take care of, we were placed, if one wants to say, in the Garden of Eden to take care of this creation. And look what we've done. I mean, have we graduated from Schoolhouse Earth with a real diploma, or have we actually failed the test? This is something I think we have to seriously look at as a humanity.
What do you think?
I think, like any class, and I've actually taught at university, that some people are actually better at it than others. And so the thing is that what has to change is that you don't just say those who are better at it and those who have failed, you know, go back and try it again. The people who are better actually all need to help each other. We all need to raise each other's consciousness to help one another so that we all pass the course.
Well, when you talk about better at it, like if you're down in South America or the Amazons, you were saying it's not all the evil rubber companies coming in, but it's some of the people not knowing. How would you or those who are better at it impart what they're better at to the people who are worse, who I think are just lacking in some.
Right. Well, one of the things
guidance.
that we were at the World Summit for Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, but 10 years before that, there was the Rio Summit. And what was great is that all these indigenous people, Native Americans and people from all over the globe, we're talking people from Australia and the Maoris from New Zealand, and people from Norway, the indigenous cultures, because they are indigenous there, and of course the Native Americans from our country, the United States, and the Amazon Indians, they all came together and they started talking. And they not only talked, but they got on television, and they started, people were filming them, making reports, so that everyone started realizing the sensitivity that we have to the planet, and the education. They started educating each other as to what's going on and what they can do, how they need to work closer together. And I think it's transformed. I know it's transformed in some sense, even the United Nations, to see the importance of what we call civil society, all of us trying to make a difference on the planet.
Now, you were talking about the internet, you know, giving people knowledge, and you can exchange and then find out different things and come to your own conclusions. So there is a certain, I guess, agora, you know, the marketplace where Socrates was, you know, in cyberspace. But what about the importance of physically sitting together? Because I know you and your husband have traveled all over the world for many years, and in the emails or the messages I get through YouTube when I post the shows that I've done with your husband, it's apparent that you've made a mark for years now. How do you see the future going for the Academy of Future Sciences now that you're going to join your husband as a PhD also?
Well, I think for the most part, we think personal interrelations and dialogue is the most important thing. I think, unfortunately, with a lot of the internet, there has been the separation that I can communicate with you, but only in cyberspace. And if I'm not interested, I can turn you off at any time. Or I can not take your cell phone call if I don't want to. So actually, it's hurting, I think, humanity. It's hurting the heart of one another, of how we need to share together, how we need to live together. There was a statistic that 70% of the people in Manhattan, at least by statistical measurements, live alone. And I think that's extremely sad.
Yeah.
And I know in terms of women, you know, many people, I think 40% of the women are happy they do at this point, which is another sad situation. We are not sharing. We are not living together. We are not really putting it up with each other.
It's not only just living alone. You see people, because I ride my bicycle around Manhattan, and you can take in the nature that's here. It's tremendous. There's no accident that Manhattan was built here.
Beautiful parks, yeah.
It's and even when you're on the streets, there's something very special. And yet I see people with their iPods and
totally cut off
on the cell phones, and you don't even know that you're in Manhattan, but of course, studying the 5 elements, you would know that even the iPods, even the cell phones is being supported by that environment, by that nature. But I feel the spiritual practice is tuning in very deeply to what's putting that environment together, and then understanding your relationship to that environment and becoming profoundly more successful than you ever fathomed, because you are connected with nature. You're not fighting nature.
Right. There was a person who did a test on energy vibrations, and she took a picture. It was like a image or aura picture. And when the person was in a building, their aura was actually very, very dark and dense. And then she put them and sat them in nature, and it was like vibrant. So there's a whole different energy when we are tuned in with nature. And I think that's important, even having plants in your room. And I love one thing about New York is that people often have flowers, live flowers all over their rooms and their homes and stuff like that. So you have that little bit of nature as part of you.
But you were saying in Manhattan, 70% of the people are living alone. How do you see the Academy for Future Sciences, or what you were doing traveling around the world, versus the internet?
Well, we try to keep people coming together and sharing together. I think it's very important. There's certain levels that we have to do, obviously, in the modern age with electronics and through the internet and through telephones. But we encourage people to come together, to pray, to meditate, to tune in, to also do prayers for other parts of the planet, because we are all one. This is all Mother Earth. We're really all one person, really. We're not the separation. My husband's most recent book, End of Suffering, talks about how we really are all one unity. And remote viewing, as you might be familiar with, which is where someone can sit in one place, like here in New York, and tap into the exact image or even the exact room situation of someone in England instantaneously. We are interconnected, and we need to feel that. We need to be that. We need to share that and have that really deeply within our heart. And then we start tapping into Mother Earth, because she also feels us all together.
Now, what are your philosophy dissertation, or your professors that you're going to defend your dissertation, are they into any of this?
No, well, mostly it's more in the environment and more in social policy, because it's important. I think You have to work on many levels, and as the Academy for Future Science works on the level of new technologies, sometimes we're introducing water purification, which is critical. Water, as you know, is one of the most critical elements on the planet at this time.
That is the issue.
Yeah, and we've looked at other technologies. We're members of the Hydrogen Energy Society. We've always supported hydrogen energy for cars. Can you imagine, one of the great things with New York is if we actually had hydrogen running in our cars, and it might cost a little bit more, but there would be no noise. All the car noises would be gone. I have to tell you, this would be one of the greatest cities. Then you really can tap into nature with all those car noises gone. And so, you know, all these things we don't realize that. So that's part of our work, and we believe that trying to push ahead with moving on a technological level as well as a consciousness level, two tracks, so to speak, is extremely important.
I wasn't able, with your husband, to go into the zero-point energy, but I had done several interviews in Panama City with John Cheshire, and he's associated with the Capstone Society, and they brought Hal Puthoff from Austin, Texas. I can't remember the name of his institution, but the discussion was fascinating about zero-point energy. And
we love Hal. We know Hal as well, and he's an excellent person. He is doing tests on all different types of technologies. He's looked at cold fusion and, as you said, zero point, and he's looking at whether certain types of geometries can really trigger the 0 point. And I know some people feel that it's already utilizable, but even if we weren't going to take that much of a quantum leap of going into free energy technology, which is what 0 point is all about, even if we take, you know, smaller steps using solar and using wind to produce hydrogen energy, we still can be free and stop polluting the Mother Earth.
You mean live more organically?
Well, live more organically in terms of the fossil fuels, because I do believe whether it's a natural cycle or not a natural cycle, there's definitely some evidence that all the fossil fuels we're using on the planet with all the cars is polluting and causing a CO2 rise in the atmosphere, which even if the planet is warming up itself, is just giving it that extra kick. And we don't need to give the planet an extra kick in terms of global warming. So I believe with most scientists that we are causing part of this global crisis that's going on.
But you know, this is something I want to investigate more, because I've seen some other studies, but we can put that aside. What excites me about working with the Academy for Future Sciences is that you can create a platform where nobody will be sort of penalized to say you absolutely can't think this, but that they would be welcomed to say, let's put this on the table, let's take a look at it from many different directions. And to me, the meditation, the prayer, the ritual, the awareness of a higher perspective can be that kind of anchor, even though it seems lofty, to allow one to know that the future, the problems are solved by stepping outside of the box, that we don't really imagine what it is now.
That's the interesting thing. Even Einstein, he used to meditate. We actually visited one of the places he stayed in Palm Springs, a famous shots that they used to take of Einstein in Palm Springs. And he would go up this little hillside, and every morning, 6 in the morning when the sun rises, he would be meditating. People don't realize he had a spiritual side to him. And many scientists who are bringing in this better technology or new technology also have a spiritual side to themselves, and they start seeing the geometries, they start seeing the potential, and they start, as you said, going outside the box, because you can't do it by staying in the box. You can't do it by the intellectual mind. In a sense, it comes from the creative mind.
Right.
And that's part of the Divine Mother.
Yeah, so something that might be terrifying, you know, like that Kali aspect of the Divine Mother, might be exactly, you know, perceived from a higher awareness. It might be exactly the impetus that you need to go into it.
Well, on the eastern side, you mentioned Shiva, and Shiva, of course, is the destroyer, and many people think, oh, that means death, but it really isn't. It means that she destroys the old Maya, and when she cuts through the old Maya, we start seeing the greater reality, and we start being able to get outside of this normal mindset and start seeing the fact that we have a greater potential, we have a greater unity, we have a greater consciousness.
He destroys the illusion.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a...
Or she. I still like the she.
Well, yeah, either way, but I think the idea of Shiva, the destroyer, means that it's just the silence that's at the basis of relationship. But then again, Paramashiva was a term that was used for Tantra to illustrate something much higher than how Tantra is usually viewed. The idea of the feminine it has a lot of baggage to it in history that's made it not so understood. And actually, environmental studies, I think, is the most pristine and accurate way of understanding what this science is and this knowledge is, because we live in nature. We will always live in nature.
And you look at the seed, and then you look how it unfolds, and it unfolds through almost like a Fibonacci series, which is the sacred geometry, and then it puts forth almost the multi-flowered lotus with many petals that represent all of life. Everything is almost a microcosm into a macrocosm, and of course that represents us as well and our sharing. And of course, I agree with you in terms of the feminine. If you look even at the Western tradition, the Bible, it said, you know, Eve was the problem in a sense. But it really was the creative notion on this planet that was limited, the creative energy of not only the feminine but even the male that was suppressed, that that was put down. And now I believe that there really is a paradigm shift, that the male and the female elements are coming together, and that the creative side of the brain is being able to step forward and saying, we can make a difference. I know that there is a greater reality. I don't have to listen to the old paradigm.
Right. Well, that's something I'm looking forward to. What I meant about the destroyer, though, is I remember when Y2K was happening, I was in a position of being a director of a charity that I created. I felt pressure to help this, and
That's
I was
great.
just, but the thing is, it was a fraud. Y2K didn't
well, that's your
and see, this is something that was so upsetting to me. I was at an ashram in India. I stayed in my bed for 3 days, and I was terrified, and nothing happened.
That reminds me of Jonah. If you know the story of Jonah in the Bible, God supposedly told Jonah, go and tell the people the world's coming to an end. And then at the end, the world didn't come to an end. So that's the same thing as Y2K. The reason the world didn't come to an end for Jonah, and the reason it didn't come to the end for Y2K, is because people got aware. They were warned enough. They did enough things. I think it really could have been a catastrophe if no one did anything. And that's what could have happened. But when people got up and said, we're making a change, we're going to really make a difference, this is not going to happen, we're going to watch everything. We had a friend who was an airline pilot in the studio earlier today. He was on board watching all the airline situations, and they actually stopped some planes at certain times just to make sure that there wasn't a problem. Every aspect of civilization was on track, on board, trying to help humanity at that time.
For Y2K?
For Y2K.
I have 100% different opinion
okay,
of that. But the point is it's very important to have a space where you can dialogue on it, and that you can have the evidence brought up, because you've got the peak oil thing happening, the global warming, the war on terror. There's a lot of knowledge coming out that I feel does not empower people. And with higher spiritual connection, I feel we have the fortitude to get beyond a lot of the pressure that definitely sells out certain legitimate studies. They never see the light of day because they're not going with a certain agenda.
Of course, that's a great thing with farther down the rabbit hole. You're able to do that. You're able to bring that out to people, to give them another perspective.
Yeah, but again, as long as you can reach them on the internet and then there's feedback, it's like a participatory journalism. Each person who's viewing is also participating. That's what's exciting about the internet. But I know in what I've gotten, the feedback I've gotten about the Academy for Future Sciences, people like in one case in South America, this one person just cherishes the memories that he had when he could be with you and your husband. So when you said that people are alone, or they're living isolated, and as a result they could just shut off their phone, not take the call, or not answer the email, when you're actually physically with people, you have to work that out.
No, exactly, and that's what we were trying to encourage, not to get into that isolation, because I always say you can be very spiritual when you only have yourself to deal with. You find out how spiritual you really are when you have to deal with one another, and that really opens up a whole new reality for people, and they have to face it. Many people don't want to face it anymore. They just want to, shut the door and stay in their room. But in actuality, it's not going to work for them.
But institutions do that. People say, well, I've got my job with this institution, it wants me to believe this, and then they don't interact with others, and then to get that neutral platform, it's very difficult.
Well, one of the things I have to say on the Christian side of it, that there's the aspect of the Holy Spirit, and we consider her a feminine aspect of the divine. And one of the things the Holy Spirit really wants I believe, is for all of us to work together and to help one another out. It's often called the helper, but if we're to be part of that Holy Spirit, we also have to help one another. So by sitting in your room and being alone or just doing your own spiritual thing, it's not going to be, you're not going to tap into that higher spiritual reality, that higher divine spirit, that Holy Spirit, one could say.
You need to connect more, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying physically, how does the Academy of Future Sciences do that?
Well, we're working
travel,
also with
right?
the Divine Mother as well as the Earthly Mother. You have to be in touch with what's going on the Earthly Mother side and also being in touch with what's going on with the Divine Mother.
Right. So the Earthly Mother, you take airplanes and go around and meet your people.
Well, even for the Divine Mother, you help, you go around, you also meet your people. For the Divine Mother, that's what the Divine Mother is all about, to be
Right.
the greater mother for all of humanity, and we all have to be part of her.
Right. We have only less than 2 minutes left. How do you see the Academy going in the future?
Well, we want to keep going in terms of expanding all levels of our awareness and our consciousness. The keys themselves, the foundation teaching for the Academy, has been fulfilled on many levels. We know that there's going to be different levels of intelligence that we'll start becoming aware of. We believe that there's actually a space-time overlap, which means that there will be our ability to tap into other realities, which we're not even familiar with today. And on the other hand, we realize that there are changes going on the planet that we all have to play a major role in. And technology is one part of that. Bringing out hydrogen cars, bringing out solar fuel situations. There's a whole new technology called nano solar, which is a film that you can almost put on the roof of your house and start running your house out of solar, thin films. These are all technologies that are coming out.
So you keep abreast of all those things.
I think you have to. I think you have to, and choose to go with the energy that you can. And anyone, no matter where they are, they don't have to be scientists. They can be sitting in their home taking care of their children, or they can be in the office. They all can do something for Mother Earth. That's the most important thing, and for the Divine Mother.
Great. Well, I'm getting a signal we have to wrap up now. So where would we send people?
I think send them to what we call futurescience.org. That's our website, www.futurescience.org.
Great. So thank you for joining me. And thank you for joining me. I'm Paula Gloria, and this has been another episode of Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, and I've shared it with Desiree Hurtak, talking about the environment and how God comes from nature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, good. They've got your website up there. Nice.